What's up, chooms? Lately I've been playing this relatively unknown game called Cyberpunk 2077, and as its name might imply, it is set in the year 2077, so about half a century from now. As I played it, I thought, okay, this could plausibly be our reality in 50 years if we take every last ounce of socialism left in the world and strangle it out of our system. But then there's a part relatively early on in the game where you have a flashback to Johnny Silverhand getting flatlined by a robot in 2023, which was last year. And there were tons of things in the game that I did not see in real life in 2023. Like, we just barely implanted a dude with a neurochip and we're still waiting to see if his head explodes or not. So I decided to trace the timeline of Cyberpunk back and compare it to our timeline to find out which butterfly farted differently so that they have Heelys built into their actual feet, while the best I can do with technology is spend $40 to have an underpaid DoorDasher drop a single Panera salad off at my door every time my pregnant wife gets a craving. So enjoy this footage of me driving through Night City in a way that my amygdala would in no way let me do in real life, and prepare to be cyberpunk. As you probably already know, Cyberpunk 2077 is not the first game in its universe. Cyberpunk originated as a tabletop RPG set in the distant future of 2013. This game was released in 1988, and most of the lore for the world was written by its creator, Mike Pondsmith. He's the guy responsible for the world of Cyberpunk, and CD Projekt Red hopefully paid him giant wads of cash to build on this vast world with Cyberpunk 2077. The first major difference between Cyberpunk's timeline and our timeline, aside from stuff like the founding of giant corporations or the births of key people, takes place during the Cold War, when the Gang of Four was started. The Gang of Four is a really edgy name for a secret government cabal consisting of the FBI, the CIA, the DEA, and the NSA, and it was organized so that the leaders could pull the strings of the United States government behind the president's back. They gathered and hoarded all of the data you could possibly imagine and used that to blackmail their wishes into existence. You might be thinking, but Nick, that's not a major difference from our reality. To be honest, I don't know nearly enough about what these agencies are actually doing to weigh in on the conversation, and at this point I'm way too afraid to find out. But the real major difference between the Cyberpunk timeline and our timeline was the global response to it. The European Economic Community, or the EEC, was formed shortly after the end of the Cold War, largely in response to America's acting out under the Gang of Four. The EEC shared a currency known as the Eurodollar, and they consisted mostly of Western Europe and Japan. They explicitly forbade the United States from joining the EEC and formed a working relationship with the USSR, which really pissed off the hamburger people. In retaliation, the Gang of Four started trying to spy on EEC members and devalue the Eurodollar by hacking into European and Japanese stock exchanges and artificially tanking stock prices. However, they also had amassed enemies on the Western Hemisphere, which really split their attention. So in the Gang of Four, we had the NSA that was gathering information on the entire world through mass surveillance, we had the CIA trying to tank a foreign super economy that excluded them, and the FBI was probably just committing war crimes on United States soil against citizens that were assembled in peaceful protest, which leaves us with the DEA that needed to feel useful, and they figured the best way that they could do that was to control the drug trade, and the way that they would do that would be to wage war against all of the drugs in Central and South America in the early 1990s. This war became known as the First Central American War. Notice how I said first, as in there's more to come. The First Central American War lasted much longer than it probably would have under normal circumstances, because while it was the full force of the American military against a handful of drug cartels, these drug cartels had an ace up their sleeve, which was the European Economic Community. These Europeans were professional haters to such a degree that they were bankrolling drug cartels in their fight against the United States. The climax of this war was when the EEC provided the Colombians with a nuke that they used on New York City, taking out 15,000 people. So while America is out fighting their demons and catching L's, the EEC decided to pour salt in the wounds by gathering evidence of all of their meddling in stock markets and leaking it to the public in 1994. This went viral, and as a result, the markets crashed, and since nobody was trading with America, the dollar ended up plummeting even more than any other currency. Homelessness and unemployment skyrocketed, and the world of Cyberpunk never truly recovered from this crash. Seeing all the crime and the failures of the United States government, several corporations got together to form a capitalist utopia where they could govern and let their people be free of crime, poverty, and debt. And so the construction of Night City began around this time, which was going to be a city independent from any government. I need you guys to remember that it's not the United States government specifically that is sanctioning all of the meddling in foreign affairs. This was being done by the Gang of Four, who was doing it all behind the president's back. So government officials see this evidence that's leaked to the public and they're like, huh? It's news to them. They start to think that there's some sort of shadow government hijacking America, and their suspicions are confirmed when the United States president and his vice president are both assassinated at the exact same time in the summer of 1996. At this time, the Speaker of the House was undergoing surgery, and the pro tempore of the Senate refused to become president, so succession fell onto Secretary of Defense Jonathan Seward. What then follows is a 10-year-long political game of Among Us. President Seward declares martial law and tries to root out what government agencies have gone rogue. At first, they thought it was just the NSA and the CIA, so they formed the Military Intelligence Cooperative, or the MIC, to essentially replace the NSA. However, as the FBI and DEA also began to act against this new agency, they realized in horror that this game of Among Us had 4 imposters instead of just 2. By withholding critical information from the American government, the Gang of Four caused severe damage to the United States military, their foreign assets, and their reputation. In retaliation, President Seward convinced Congress to vote out the FBI and the DEA, removing 2 of the 4 imposters from the game. Somewhere around this time, about half of Los Angeles fell into the ocean after a magnitude 10.5 earthquake, a drought occurred in the Midwest, and Alaska seceded from the Union, becoming an independent state. Also, martial law ended. The NSA and the CIA weren't going down without a fight, though. The NSA managed to have President Seward assassinated in 2003, and William Newell was sworn in as POTUS. He promptly declared martial law once again. Before he could make any moves against the NSA, however, the CIA did what the CIA does best by causing unrest in foreign countries and gifting President Newell a second Central American war. With everything on his plate, taking down the CIA and the NSA got put on the back burner. The Second Central American War was pretty crippling to the United States. However, President Newell was able to root out the remainder of the Gang of Four by granting full immunity to any member of the CIA that would come forward and rat out their co-conspirators. The CIA got reabsorbed into the United States government, so yay! The NSA went out kicking and screaming, and it took several military operations to finally stamp them out. Martial law ended once more. You were probably just bracing yourself because you thought I was going to come in with that Cyberpunk meme song to introduce the next chapter, but no, I'm not going to run that joke into the ground. We've been talking a lot about United States history, which stands to reason because we are the main character of world history. However, the other main players in Cyberpunk lore need to be spoken of at this time, the Corpos. If you look at any point in world history, whenever there is contention in war, technology advances faster. So, since Cyberpunk lore is essentially, what if every day of your life there was a non-0% chance of a nuke dropping on your head, there was a need for technology to advance. And that's where the corporations stepped in. During the multiple wars and conflicts that we've talked about, they were providing arms for all sides, both figuratively and literally. They would provide weapons, but they would also just literally give arms to people who lost them. Eventually, these cybernetic prosthetics, or cyberware, would go on to be commonplace among the general populace, and body parts would simply become replaced to increase the quality of life or just for gits and shiggles. But the earlier generations of cyberware were known for having increased instances of cyberpsychosis, or people being driven crazy as a side effect, with Johnny Silverhand being somebody who most likely went through this. In addition to profiting off of wars between countries, corporations found out that hiring their own militaries and beating the shit out of each other was a viable business practice too. In 2004, the first corporate war began because a company named Orbital Air blocked another corporation called Euro Business Machines from buying a third failing corporation named Trans World Airlines. In retaliation, Euro Business Machines tried to have Orbital Air's business negotiation team kidnapped so they couldn't buy out TWA. This escalated to a war both in cyberspace and IRL, hackers fought over the internet, and the corporations hired third world countries to use their armies against each other. 3 more corporate wars happened between 2008 and 2025, and there's even a musical written about the 4th corporate war between Arasaka and Militech, and you can find a synopsis of it in Cyberpunk 2077. It's important to note that these wars often consisted of corporations buying out governments of countries and turning them into sock puppets, essentially. Let's check back in on the United States. After rooting out the Gang of Four, they were back on their bullshit. In 2009, they tried to overtake the Crystal Palace, which was a giant fortress space station that was owned by the European Economic Community. And when Europe found out, they fired a giant warning shot off the coast of Maryland near Washington, D.C. Between the fallout over the couple of wars that they had just been involved in and this new development, several states seceded from the Union, including North and South Dakota, Texas, Oregon, Washington, and Utah. However, most of these states were not economically or militarily equipped for this, and the total casualties over the next 15 years were over 100 million. On top of that, the Fourth Corporate War was fought on American soil, so they were the sock puppet of the corpos this time, and it really decimated the already fractured political landscape. United States President Elizabeth Crest declared martial law for the third time in the course of this video, and essentially became the dictator for the next 3.5 decades. President Crest renamed the country the New United States of America as sort of like a rallying cry, I guess, and they had a tentative treaty to remain somewhat amicable with many of the states that had seceded. In 2053, the New United States of America signed their new constitution, and President Crest stepped down after 35 years as a dictator. This all happened on July 4th because we as a country are nothing if our heads are not straight up our asses whiffing our own patriotic farts. 12 years after the new constitution was adopted, so in 2065, President Rosalind Myers is elected as president of the NUSA, and her big campaign promise was that she would bring the seceded states back into the fold. The seceded states were like, huh? As they had agreed to no such thing. Some states like Southern California, Utah, and both of the Dakotas rejoined the United States out of fear of the consequences if they didn't, while the others held strong. In 2069, President Myers declared war on the free states to try to force them back into the country. Part of the unification war involved trying to take Night City, which pissed off the corpos, especially Arasaka. They brought the full force of their own private military into Night City and scared off the NUSA armies. After this, President Myers signed a treaty with the Free States that let them retain their autonomy but forced them to participate in federal elections. Rosalind went home to DC saying, "I see this as an absolute win." However, the world's most sophisticated AI predicted that before the end of the 2070s, tensions between the NUSA, the Free States, and Night City would boil over to an even more violent conflict with a 74% confidence rate. And that's essentially the world that you inherit in Cyberpunk 2077. The country is on the brink of yet another massive war. Night City is a crime-ridden hellhole run by corporations where you either die sad or die young, and you are just trying to get by. I genuinely love the world that Mike Pondsmith created, and I love the way that CD Projekt Red was able to expand on it with Cyberpunk 2077. But anyway, I hope you had a great time having this on in the background while you do your chores and homework. It's been a pleasure being your video game history teacher, and I'll catch you on the next one.